Hi, Douglas Curtis here, and I'll be discussing the trade war that has arisen between China and Australia. Over the past year, China's trade sanctions have hit industry after industry. Now, more is at stake than exports alone. This is a story which has its roots set back further than most would realize, and is a story which goes beyond reasonable trade positions for economic benefit between two trading partners. China and Australia have for the past several years been diverging from one another on a number of issues. Issues which address the very values at the core of Australian ethics and the democracy upon which it stands. Since 2016, Australia has embarked on a policy U-turn, adopting a strategy to push back, call out, and be in front of confronting China. These issues have become contentious and placed many frictions between the two trading partners. Namely, Australia has publicly pushed back on one China policy that would see Taiwan be reunified under the Chinese Communist Party leadership and its ideologies. Second, Huawei was banned from the Australian 5G mobile infrastructure rollout, where Australia cited national security issues with the tech giant. Third, in continued disparity of values, Australia has vocalised its lack of support of China's actions toward the oppression of the Uyghur detention centres and genocide in China's western provinces. Fourth, Australia has supported the democratic process of the elections in Hong Kong, leading to China calling out Australia as being a violent interferer. Now, last, but by no means least, in a string of call-outs by Australia, on the 19th of April 2020, Australia joined a global voice which sought to have an independent inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus in Wuhan, China. It would seem that this has now woken the sleeping dragon's ire toward Australia, and it is now seeking to avenge the wrongs it feels have been done. Not less than 1 month on from Australia's call for an independent inquiry into the origins of COVID, did it receive its first sanctions from China. On the 19th of May 2020, Australia was slapped with an 80% tariff on barley exports into China, with this to hold place for the next 5 years. This meant that Australia and its grain industry had to find a new trading partner for 600 tonnes of grain. This had already been sown. If not, this will mean hundreds of millions of dollars of loss for the Australian primary producers. Later, the very same month, 4 major abattoirs were banned from exporting any of its products into China. There is still no end date in sight as to when this ban will be raised on the abattoirs. Chinese officials have stated that the ban is due to labelling errors and on the export packaging. However, they have since ceased communication with the Foreign Trade Minister and the industry counterparts. The onslaught has continued, with the wine industry being hit next in August of 2020. China has imposed tariffs of up to 212% on exports, effectively killing any trade into China. Chinese officials stated that Australia was flooding the Chinese market with artificially low pricing to capture its market. This, however, has been ridiculed as spurious, with many independent parties stating that the pricing levels of Australian wine in China was well above the pricing level of most of its competitors, including the domestic Chinese winemakers. This, however, has seen headlines peak with good old Australian coal being banned for 1 year, which left Australian exports sitting in a queue of 77 ships waiting to be docked into China. These ships and their crews were abandoned by China as they sat into port for up to 5 months while this embargo ensued. Surprisingly though, it's been the fisheries industry that has been one of the most damaged during this trade retaliation. In the southern region of Tasmania, the lobster industry has seen prices fall to perilous lows. Before November 2020, the pricing level of southern rock lobster would fetch up to $80 per kilo. Once the Chinese demand has been taken from this equation, the pricing level for the industry has now fallen to $25 per kilo. The devastation that this has placed on the industry and the small businesses which operate within it may very well see the industry contract by up to 75% during the next 5 years' worth of sanctions. The retaliation has relentlessly continued without any reasonable economic grounds and impacted a multitude of other industries, including timber, cotton farmers, and copper miners. However, and perhaps most interestingly, Australia's greatest export of modern history is suspiciously not on the Chinese hit list, so far. Australian iron ore has continued to be the mainstay of economic relations between the two partners and has been a main contributor in the overall outcome of trade between the partners. One would think that all this trade sanctioning from China would see Australia falling behind on its previous years of exports as its component of GDP. However, Australia has come out of this trade sanctioning ahead and in front of all previous years on record. The outcome has ultimately been a $10 billion surplus year on year since the sanctions have begun. Keeping in mind, though, China is furiously seeking to diversify its supply chain partners from iron ore through Africa, Papua New Guinea, and Brazil. So how long can Australia continue to count on being propped up by the iron ore industry and its export value to the Chinese? So, where to from here for the partnership? What is the cost of Australian values? Are they up for grabs to maintain the status quo? This current position of trade and economic relations must cause Australia to reflect upon that which is most important to us all. Will we as a nation continue to speak up against that which we see as being corrupt and unjust? Or should we maintain our silence and act in such a way as which would embody the values of might is right? For what 2 cents might be worth, I would implore the free market of the Australian economy to seek to diversify, and diversify. We need not break ties entirely with China. However, we must realise that we have ensnared ourselves and our economic dependence into the lap of a foreign political system with which we will never entirely agree or always align with. Perhaps we were foolhardy and one-eyed, with greed being a key driver towards an imagined economic utopia with the world's single largest market. But now we must realise that this is only a dream and that security and stability need to take centre stage. While in the short run, this will cause a lag in mobility of resources being efficiently allocated, we have a world of opportunity to trade with, and many global partners. Some industries may contract permanently, and others will be bound to boom. Australia mustn't be myopic. It must maintain its values and do what is right in the face of tyranny, which would force Australians to otherwise be silenced. As one philosopher put it, all that is required for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. I believe that Edmund Burke had this picture in mind when he coined that phrase. Australia, stay on the right side of history. Keep true to our values. I'm Douglas Curtis, and thank you for taking the time to listen to my perspective on the trade war and political retaliation that is facing China.